I've been an official member for about 4 years, and I was a recruit for a year prior to that as well. After I really started being part of the Mercs for a number of years, I realized how much I loved costuming and really started going for that more full-time. I ended up quitting my job, and now I work in the film industry making parts of props and costumes and stuff like that that are now seen on TV and movies. When I started making my second kit with my boyfriend, I found that once again the most challenging part of my kit and his kit was the knees. I find that with, as I'm sure you guys know as well, with ABS or center knees, they tend to break. And that's something that I really just didn't want to have happen in our new kits. So what I decided to do was I decided to make rubber knees, which are these guys here, simply because of the flexibility of it and how easy, honestly, how easy it was to make and how durable they are, which is really wonderful. So today I'm going to be going over a little bit about the materials that I use, the techniques I use, and how I managed to make them paintable, which in the past with the injection formed rubber knees that you guys have seen on the forms, they are incredibly hard to paint, and I've solved that issue for myself, and I want to share that with you guys as well, so you guys can do this if this is something that you'd like to make. What I'm going to be explaining today is my process and how I went from a 3D printed piece to actually a ready-to-wear rubber knee. The first thing that we did, of course, is research. So my boyfriend went and took a lot of screenshots from the TV show The Mandalorian, and really tried to see if they were using more than one knee mold. So now you'd think that the knee that they used, which is really similar to this one here, they would actually make a second mold having this piece, of course, on the outside of the other leg, so this piece mirrored. However, because of how film works, we really think that they didn't. That they just used this mold twice and cut off the tab and swapped it to the other leg. Maybe due to a time constraint or budget or whatever, or they probably think that we wouldn't notice, but we did. How you can tell that it is mirrored is this piece here, which is the larger of the two gaps. It is on the outside of the other leg. So that's why I decided to only do one. And plus it's also cheaper for me to make only one as well, because making molds can be an expensive process. However, this process that we're working on today is using the minimal amount of material. So what we did is we actually found this one, which we found fairly accurate for the Death Watch knees or the Mandalorian knee. And we contacted the seller of the file, and we asked him if it was all right for us to make a mold of this, because obviously we don't want to duplicate or recast anything without permission, because that is a major no-no. After 3D printing the file, what we did is we did several layers of filler primer, sanded it down to make sure that there were no print lines, and then we got to mold making. So first off, what I do is I take tin foil, aluminum foil, make it into a hard ball and put it underneath my mold. So that means that I'm using less of the sulfur-free clay, because clay is expensive, though it is reusable. After I had the clay all around, which is the divide between the two halves of the mold, what I did is I started using Rebound 25, which is a brush-on platinum silicone, which I've worked with a fair amount, and I really, really like it. It does go on fairly thin for the first couple of coats, but those are your beauty coats and you want them to go on thin. That means that it preserves all of your detail, and you can use a painter's brush to put them on, just like a 1 or a 1.5 inch rough brush. So I brush that on, allow it to cure until it is a little bit tacky but no longer sticky. Then I do a second beauty coat to make sure that all the spots are covered, and what I often use is a silicone dye, which, I mean, if you don't do a lot of a lot of mold making, it's probably not needed because it is about $60 Canadian. I don't know how much it is US. However, I did recently hear of a additive that you can put into the silicone, which is the Jacquard Pearl X pigments, which are really wonderful. You just dish a little bit of those in, mix it all up, and it changes the color of the silicone, which works great. Thanks, both Annie. And then, so after you have those 2 coats on, then you can use your Rebound 25 again and mix up some Thivex in with it, which is a silicone thickener. Make sure that the silicone that you're using does allow you to use Thivex, because it can have an adverse reaction, which is never what you want to hear while you're mold making. So when you add the Thivex in, do 1 layer, allow to cure till it's tacky, no longer sticky, do another coat, so you've got 4 coats. So it makes it thick and durable. Mine looks like this. So now what you'll notice here on the back is I've got the registration marks. So that means that when I make my mother mold, which is this piece right here, is made out of Plastipaste. So you want to make sure that the mother mold can fit the silicone can fit directly into the mother mold, and it really holds it in really well. While you're using Plastipaste, what's really important is the texture of the Plastipaste can be really rough hard on your hands, especially as you're smoothing it on, it's very fibrous and it does stick up, and while you're if you're handling it at all, it can hurt your hands after a while. So I, again, use 99% isopropyl alcohol and spray it down, and it smooths it all down really nice, which makes it much softer on your hands, which is really important. Especially if you're doing any sort of rotocasting. We're not doing that today, but when you do, you know. The other thing to note about adding the isopropyl onto the Plastipaste is that it turns it yellow. I didn't realize that happened when I first did it, but it does, and it kind of freaked me out a little bit. It's usually about this color. So now after you finish that, after your mother mold is set up, your silicone has been set for over 24 hours, your Plastipaste is on and cured into a nice hard shell, it's time to flip your entire mold over and remove all of the clay. So once that's all removed, what the next step is basically just doing the entire thing over again on the inside. Now I either use the Man Ease Release to keep the layers of Plastipaste apart, or I use Sonite wax. Again, if you are just new to molding and casting and you don't have a lot of extra money to be dealing with all this stuff, you can always see if you can go in on it with a friend or take a look online, because there are a lot of other alternatives which work sometimes just as well. I do recommend picking this up just because of how versatile it is and how much you'll end up using it when you're doing your casting. Okay, so next, so when you've got that flipped over facing upwards with the inside of your master visible, then you want to apply your ease release and then apply the thin coats of your Rebound 25 again. Again, you want to do 2 thin coats of Rebound 25, 2 thick coats of Rebound 25, and then make sure you've got your registration marks on there, of course. And then after that is set, then you go back to your Plastipaste here and make another Plastipaste form. Now there are a lot of different ways to make mother molds. You can use fiberglass, you can use hydrocal, like options are endless. I just happen to use all of these because this is what I happen to have on hand. I have a lot of stuff on hand. The first challenge that I'm going to go over with your rubber knees is gluing anything to them. Now you can use a urethane glue, or a polyurethane glue rather, to glue stuff to it, but it's tricky. Now if you are casting your own rubber knees like this, the best glue that I've found for them is just more of the same. So I mix it up, wait till it's just getting to that kind of like almost set feeling. It gets warm and it becomes goopier and it doesn't run as much anymore. So what I did before is I actually drilled holes into the knees, placed the Chicago screw, and then I put more Simpact around it, which keeps it from tearing off, which is great. You can do the same thing for actually putting a strip of Velcro in here, which is what I'm going to be doing for these here. So that way I can have a patch of Velcro on my knee as well as a strap to hold these in place so that they're not going anywhere. How I managed to solve this issue was I decided that I'm just going to add this Chicago screws into my actual mold because I don't have time to drill holes onto the back of each one, mix up the Simpact 60A, put them in place, and then put more Simpact over top of them. It's a laborious process. So what I decided to do in order to solve that issue of actually having to put the Chicago screws in afterwards to add the strapping is I actually punched holes in my mold and added in Chicago screws. So why I did that is so that when I'm actually pouring the mold, they're actually embedded inside, and then you're just gonna be able to thread Chicago screws directly into the Chicago screws that are already embedded, which is really wonderful. So you probably noticed that my mold looks a little messy. And why that is that that's how I solve my painting issue. Now, painting urethane rubbers is always a challenge. Now, I can use urethane paint. However, I do notice that in the points where it flexes, most notably in here, is it does tend to crack a little bit on the high flex areas. What I do is I use Montana Black spray paint. And what I do is I take my molds into the spray booth and I just give them a good coat and then let them dry. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. Okay, so as you see here, I have sprayed the interior of both sides of the mold with the Montana Black spray paint. So when I pour the material that I'm using, which is the Simpact 60A, into the mold, what's gonna happen is that it's gonna actively bond with the paint. When that happens, it means that any movement of the mold and any flexing of the material, the paint is going to stay adhered into the material, which is really what we're going for. Okay, so now what I'm going to be doing with the curve of the knee like this, it is a little bit harder to put together, and just because how it slides together. As you see here, this is what the Simpact looks like when it's cast in, and it kind of comes back out of the mold. So it's nice and put together, and I'm just going to apply clamps around the outside. So with this type of mold, what I forgot to mention, you have to allow air to escape from the mold as well as you to inject material into the mold. So what I've done is I have drilled holes in the mold, which allows you to take what I'm using here is a 60cc syringe. So what I can do is I can actually plug it into the mold and inject my material inside, while also having other holes up here, which allows the air to actually come out of the mold, which is what you want, so you can have a bubble-free cast, which is really important, obviously. When I redo this mold, I will be using wing nuts to actually hold the mold together. However, this works just as well. So like I was talking about before, I am using Simpact 60A, which has a 4-minute pot life and a 2-hour set time. This is the 2-pint kit. I also have the gallon kit as well. I just refill these little bottles, which I find a lot easier to work with. As always, when you're molding and casting, make sure that you're wearing the proper PPE. I always wear gloves because I make a huge mess. I'm also going to be wearing this mask as well, which protects me from any fumes. These cups here are my favorite as they do have the graduated measurements on them, which is absolutely wonderful. And I also use tongue depressors. I also use So Strong Black by Smooth On to color my urethanes. I swear that's what it says underneath here, I promise. But it's spilled one time and it just gets everywhere. Okay, welcome back. It's been about 2 hours since I poured this mold. I went and just let it sit for a while, and now I'm going to take all the clamps off. That one this just stays here now. And so does that one. Now pulling it apart can be a little bit tough just because of the material that kind of, you know, flows out of the sides while you're pouring. And now I'm just going to open up the mold. And there we go. That's looking great. So that's looking great. Now, as you can see here, those are the Chicago screws that are coming out the back. So those are stuck in there and they are not going anywhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull that out. Now, the Simpax 60A takes approximately 48 hours to reach its full hardness. Okay, so there we go. And as you can see, it will reach its full hardness in about 48 hours. But there we go, it's a nice cast. So this is just flashing from where the material came out of the mold a little bit. And I just cut it off once it's set with a pair of curved scissors. Okay, so this one here has been about 48 hours. And as you can tell, it does have a lot less flop to it. And it stays in a nice shape all the time. So I know that you can't really tell because I did use black urethane to make this to begin with, but this is actually a black painted coating that you're seeing here. Now, like I was talking about earlier, the stress that you'll notice when if it did start to crack is right in here, which is the narrowest part, which is obviously where it has the most flex to it. And as you can see here, it's nice and black and smooth all the way across, which is awesome. So now I have used Krylon and Rust-Oleum paints, but really I find that the best one that I've found of all the ones that I've used is the Montana Black. And they do come in a variety of colors, so even if you didn't want to have to paint it, you could actually spray paint your kit color directly into the mold, pour the urethane rubber on top of it, and then it'll come out actually the color that you want there, which is perfect. You could also even use a silver paint inside and then do your painting and your weathering on top of that. So this here is my knee that I'm using for my new kit. And what I did is I actually started it with doing the black layer, then I dry brushed a silver, just using a golden acrylic, the heavy body acrylic. I just dry brushed it over and then did my damage with liquid latex and spray painted the Montana gold in this wonderful melon color. So, and then I went back and airbrushed it as well to get a little bit of these dark spots as well in here. Now what we were talking about before is our attachment methods. Now before I actually embedded the Chicago screws directly into the mold, what I did is I actually just created a little bit of a divot and used more of the Simpac 60A to actually embed Chicago screws in the back. It works, however, it's just not as slick as actually embedding the Chicago screws in. So also what I did here is I actually put a Velcro patch in the middle just to make sure that when it's actually on my knee, that it really stays secure how I want it to be and not just reliant on a strap that runs around the back of my leg. Also what I did, so I only have to use the one mold, is I actually cut the wings off of it on both sides to have a little bit less, have a little bit more of a slim profile. So that is how I made my knee mold and did all the casting. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout on the forums. My name is Gardengeek, and happy making. Hi there.